2 o'clock. Turn this on. It's 2 o'clock, and call the meeting to order. Before we get into the commission, I'd like to, on behalf of the Finance Commission, offer our condolences and prayers to Catherine on Jeff's passing.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. With that, I'd like to proceed with the approval of minutes.
Also move.
Support.
All in favor?
Oh, aye.
Aye. Public comment is next, and I see there is no representation of the public, and so I will proceed. One of the things that I had requested that Jim O'Connor give a presentation on the status of several events, not only the status of the announcement with negotiations with OUC, but also what is the status of the actions taken by Indian River Shores and the county. He said he would be somewhat later. He'll be here. So we will oppose the order and get into the other matters that are on the table. In terms of chairman matters, I have a number of items I wanted to discuss, but most of them tie into what Jim is going to present. So I will wait until he gives his presentation, then all of us can come in and probe as to what the situation is. In any event, with that new business being held in abeyance, an old business in abeyance, we can get then to the finance director's matters in regard to A and B, which are on the agenda. Cindy?
I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. I believe the item A is the electric utility rate study. Is it
Yes,
in that
it
order?
is.
Okay.
And B, of course, is the
Where's the
draft
budget
of
amendment?
the
Yeah.
budget amendment.
Wasn't sure which order I'd put them in. So we'll take the easy one first. As you know, the last electric utility rate structure study that we had was conducted in 2009 by PRMG, and that led to some revised rates that were effective January 1st, 2010. Back in May, the council directed us to prepare a request for proposals to do both a rate sufficiency rate structure study and a utility optimization study, and those were split up. This commission, as well as the Utility Commission, we reviewed my RFP for the electric utility rate study. We issued it in August. We got 6 responses. There was a selection committee made up of myself, Tom Richards, the utility director, and Janet Roberts, my customer service manager. And we ranked the proposals, pick our top 3 ranked proposers, and had oral presentations by them. And based on all of that due diligence, we have ranked Public Resources Management Group, or PRMG, number 1 as our number 1 ranked firm. I included the purchasing memo that had some of the details on the scoring, and also as backup I included the transmittal letter from PRMG to give you a flavor for who they are and what they do. Just in general, they're extremely well qualified. They have a lot of experience with Florida municipal-owned utilities, experience with the various elements of our utility in particular, because they've modeled us before, and as was evident in their presentation, have kept up on what's going on with us in these last 5 years. And so that, as well as a happy side note, they were also the least expensive proposal that we got. presumably because they have already gotten a good start on modeling the city's utility. And so with that, what we're looking for is for both the utility and the finance commissions to endorse staff's recommendation of PRMG as the number one ranked firm and the firm that we should award this contract to. Right now, the total performance time on the contract is tentatively 4 months, but probably in about the 3-month time frame is when they'll begin making presentations to this body, to the Utility Commission, leading up to the presentation of the final product to the City Council. The Utility Commission unanimously endorsed staff's recommendation. They did ask 2 questions that I thought were worth sharing because they were good ones. One, how did I feel about the timing of this, given the timing of some of the other announcements that have been made about changes in the costs and changes in the contracts, or potential changes in the contracts? And the answer is, I think the timing is excellent, because they're going to establish a baseline model, and their RFP made it clear that we want their baseline model to be established and then them be able to model what would happen to rates if there are changes in the underlying costs of running the utility. So I think the timing is excellent, and whatever time frame changes transpire, we'll have a baseline as it sits now, and then we'll be able to model the effect of changes in the various cost elements on the rates. So I don't think it affects the timing at all. And second, what kind of continuing relationship we would have with them, and what's in the RFP and what I anticipate is, last time they did a 5-year study and then they gave it to us and then they left. We didn't have any continuing relationship with them. What I've asked is that they stay on board once the initial study's complete, to do either quarterly or biannual updates of actuals versus their projections, and to tweak this as we go along and stay with us for that full 5 years so that they can fold reality into the model. And then also, as we make optimization recommendations, they can model what those would do to rates. So with that, I can answer any questions you might have about them or about the scope. And other than that, just looking for hopefully your endorsement of the staff recommendation.
I have a question. That is,
Sure.
on the funding. How's it going to be funded? And presumably it's going to be funded in the electric utility.
It will. It'll be funded in the non-departmental professional services line item.
Is that in the proposed budget or not?
It's small compared to the total proposed budget, so that should be sufficient budget for it.
Thank you.
But it's not a line item in there, right, Cindy?
There's one line item called non-departmental professional services. It's the line item where we put the transactional attorneys and any other sort of generic electric utility studies that are undertaken throughout the year. So I think the total line item for this year was $1 million, and for next year is like $600,000. So there is a line item. It's just not its own line item all by itself.
Well, and there's also professional services that are over and above the legal. Professional services like engineering, advice and counsel and so forth. So,
and there's one line item for all of those that's $500,000 budgeted for next year.
Professional services?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If you get someone to do this once, what tends to get skewed when you go on a few years, like 5 years? What tends to get out of whack?
Well, again, they model their 5 years on 5 years of assumptions about growth in health insurance costs and pensions, the number of employees we're likely to have, whether salaries are going to rise or not. So when you go 5 years out with that kind of projection, as we saw, for instance, with our pension cost projection, we haven't had annual increases in salaries. We've had decreases because we've decreased the numbers of people. So the cost side of it needs to be remodeled. They are making projections about purchase power costs 5 years out, and we make them for 1 year, and even at the 1 year mark are kind of off. But as we've talked about before, rate sufficiency is something that we've done a good job of with the model that I created, which is not super sophisticated, and it's easy to make sure that their revenues are bigger than expenditures. I mean, relatively easy.
Yeah.
What I would like for them to do, and what I haven't done, and we haven't undertaken in a while, is really look in depth at the customer demographics. So when we get questions like, what percentage of the city's commercial demand customers are within the city limits, we have answers without having to gruel through that data ourselves. And also, we're asking them to look at the rate structure to make sure that our assignment of costs to the particular elements that we're using to recover them is still accurate, whether our base rate is good given what our fixed costs are, whether our energy tiers are appropriate, things like that. So it's sort of a combination of the two.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a point. I'd like to just expand a little bit on Randy's question there. Is the purpose of this study to ultimately show us how to get lower rates?
The purpose of this study ultimately is to show us how to get rates that are sufficient to cover our costs and how they should be structured. In terms of lowering the rates, once that model is created, lowering the rates is going to be a function of lowering the expenses. So this study is not designed to help us lower the expenses. This study is designed to say, you've got this kind of expenses and these kinds of customer demographics, and here's how your rates should be so that they create enough revenue to cover your expenses. What they may recommend to us could translate to lower rates for certain customers, but maybe higher for others. It just remains to be seen. For instance, here's an example.
Okay.
Residential customers. For up to 1,000 kilowatt hours, it's $46.10. The kilowatt hours over 1,000 are $73, roughly $73. They may say to us, you know what, that's a pretty sharp tier, and maybe you should have two tiers. Maybe you should have a tier at 1,000 and another tier at 1,400. What that may mean is that a 1,200 customer actually does get a slightly lower rate. Depends on what they recommend. So, I guess in a nutshell, no, they are not here to help us get lower rates. They are here to help us make sure that our rates are sufficient and that the structure is appropriate.
Okay.
The optimization study is what will help us lower rates.
The optimization study?
And that's a separate RFP.
A separate one. And that hasn't been done yet?
That RFP has been released, but it hasn't been evaluated, and there hasn't been an award recommendation yet.
And no one really with the city has seen it yet? Or
The city created the RFP. We're waiting for proposals.
I mean the optimization study.
It hasn't started yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
It hasn't
then
started.
if-
It should be done.
okay.
We're hoping to have it on contract, to have it complete by maybe mid-year of next year, I think is
Okay.
what Tom Richards is projecting.
All right. So if someone has a plan right now to lower the rates and say they can lower the rates, then in order to do that, they must have a handle on the costs and our expenses. They must know how to get them down.
We
Right.
have a handle on our current costs and expenses.
Okay.
So yes, someone would have to say, hey, currently your expense for purchase power is this. We have a way to lower it by X million dollars. Or currently your cost for T&D is this. We have a way to lower it by X million dollars. We have budgeted expenses for next year, and we have an updated projection of what purchase power is going to cost us based on very recent data from OUC and from FMPA. So we know what, if nothing changes, we know what next year will cost us with reasonable certainty if nothing changes. So yes, if someone wants to lower the rates, they have to get some of those costs lower.
So is one of the purpose of this study is to see that the individual users are paying their fair share? That the,
Kind of.
that,
Yeah, that's a good way of
The cost
putting
to
it.
a particular user is appropriate for that class of user. So
that is-
one class isn't paying more than they should.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it, that the costs are apportioned appropriately to the different customer classes, and that the total revenue that's generated is bigger than the total expenses with a reasonable margin so that we have a healthy utility, depending on if we, experience some ups and downs. Those are really the two primary goals.
And the other thing that we've talked about before is user fees or connect fees or disconnect fees to see to what degree that they comply with the actual cost of all of those different fees.
They will look at our fees. Again, as we talked about, you're not trying to make those fees cover your actual costs. You're trying to make them be appropriate within the industry as well as be appropriate with your policies. In other words, if you have a policy that you can come in till a certain time to avoid being cut off, if that time is all the way up till 5 o'clock, then maybe your fee at that point should be a little higher because it means overtime to deal with it. So yeah, they're going to look at our fees, and they're also going to look at things that we don't do. For instance, FP&L charges residential customers a demand charge over 20 kW. We don't have residential demand charges. Is that something that's prevalent in the industry? There are also time of use charges, where if you want to run your pool pump in the middle of the day and that kicks you over a certain demand, that's more costly than if you choose to run it in the middle of the night. And those things are designed to help the city lower its peak requirement as a whole, because that peak requirement as a whole is one of the big cost drivers for our purchase power contracts. In other words, we have a variable variable component to our purchase power contracts. But we have a fixed component that we have to pay a certain portion of every month that's designed to cover that peak load that we could need based on our actual experience. And so lowering that peaking can really help lower costs. And there's ways that you can use fees to incentivize customer behavior. And they may have some good advice about those kinds of things as well. The other thing, just bottom line, is when we did our last 5-year study, we filed a 5-year set of rate sheets with the PSC, and we're out. I mean, the last 5-year rate was 10/1/2014. So, I mean, we're not governed by the PSC, but what we try to do is make sure that we make appropriate filings with them as informational filings, and we need to update that. So.
Well, just to comment on back when they did some analysis with consultants, they did the optimization study for water sewer, but they did not do an optimization study for electric. And in all candor, because there was a expected sale on 1/1/14, a lot of effort wasn't put in to lower the rates or try to provide various efficiencies, since indeed it was like a 1-year horizon when they were doing the budgets for the expected sale. Since then, and I'll get back to that when Jim comes in. But getting back to water sewer, it was, I believe, enormously successful in terms of their overall operations, which improved dramatically with the implementation of the recommendations of the optimization study. Hopefully we'll get, certainly tangentially, some of that from the study when it is released.
And as you know, we've talked about, and this is not actually part of the scope of the optimization study, because I think we have a good handle on it without needing a consultant to work with us, customer service improvements. We actually have had our bank work with us, and some technology improvements in customer service that we hope down the road, 1.5 to 2 years, could lower the customer service costs and improve the customer service offering. But to do those things requires an investment. And again, if you're not planning to continue owning your electric utility, you're not going to make those kinds of investment in both time and money if your plan is to sell. So that's why some of these things have gone, it's not that we purposely tried to operate the electric utility inefficiently. It's just that we weren't in a mode where we were looking for to launch a big new website or do any of those things, because we weren't planning to continue to have it. So,
well, specifically the billing system, which was put on hold until there was more clarity, without not knowing whether you were going to have 50,000 customers or whether you're going to have,
And
20.
What's funny about that one, and actually that's going before council on November the 4th. It was budgeted for this coming year. It turns out on further analysis that there's not a big cost differential for whether we were going to do it before or after we sell. It's a software update, so the number of customers within the system doesn't really affect the price. The reason that was put on hold was the notion that after we lost the electric utility customers, we would get a different kind of billing software. That was really the whole point there. And what we looked at was it would actually be more expensive, even without the electric utility customers, for us to get a different kind of billing software. And the new version of the software we're currently using actually solves a bunch of the problems and issues that we had with the software we're using. So, long story short, we're not on hold anymore because it doesn't make any sense, sale or no sale, to move to a new kind of software. It makes sense to stay with the one we have. It's cheaper, and it solves a bunch of our problems. So that's going to move forward, and that change will help trigger a bunch of other changes in banking and billing and things like that. So,
just for my clarification, and the purpose of this rate study then is really to help guide us in the future as to future costs and expenses, how we handle those. Is that a good summation, or am I off?
It's to clarify whether our current rates and rate structure are sufficient for our current operation.
Okay.
Number one. And then as a secondary thing, once that model is put together, then as we move through this optimization that we're talking about, every time we change an expense, we can put that data into the model and find out what it would do to rates. So it's rate sufficiency and rate structure at the current level, and the potential to model the impact on rates of any cost reductions that we have later on, or any changes to our system.
Where I'm coming, also what I'm leading up to is, I believe Tuesday night, our attorney gave a very detailed, I would say, announcement of a proposal that I believe is going to be given to the town, Indian River Shores, and the county. And I don't want to talk about the litigation, but I think now it's a matter of public record. If I'm understood him correctly, I think he's going to give a proposal Tuesday morning. And I just thought he's a fine lawyer, and he articulates well. Seems to be very confident in coming up with a lower rate structure, and yet he's doing that without the benefit of this rate study coming in. So
that was actually done based on our current rate sufficiency model.
Right.
So again, we how do I put this better? We could not do this, and we could keep going the way that we have with the model that I've put together.
Right.
And we've managed to achieve rate sufficiency pretty well for a few years. But I'm not a rate consultant, so the rate structure is something that I'm not really I'm not prepared to model. So
okay, well then, based upon what you just said, I think it begs the question: do we really need this rate study if we can keep on going the way we've been going with rates pretty currently? I mean, I'm trying to cover both sides. That's all.
Right.
$47,000 is no small sum. Even with our budget, it's not a small sum.
Again, it's two separate things. Okay, let's separate two things. Rate sufficiency. Okay, rate sufficiency is what I've been doing. Our revenue is bigger than expenses. Are our rates enough to cover our costs? That's pretty straightforward.
Right.
Rate structure, customer demographics, a model that can be used to model what happens when you change different elements of the rate structure, and documentation that's sufficient to support a filing with the PSC. Mm-hmm. Those are things that what on my spreadsheet can't do. So we're getting two things from this. We're getting let's say, what's the word I'm looking for? They're maybe going to affirm our rate sufficiency, but the rate structure side of it, are the fees and costs appropriate, a model that can handle changes, something that can be backed up as a filing with the PSC for the next 5 years, looking at things like time of use rates, demand charges. Those are all things that I can't do and that my model cannot do.
Yeah.
So that's really the primary thrust of this, is the things that staff can't do.
Okay.
Does that help at all?
That helps me very much. That's fine.
Any more questions? Jim has arrived, and if one of the first things we've been asked for, if there are no other questions, that to make a motion to recommend going forward with the study.
Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate to ask some questions before we get a motion in a second, or after we get the motion in a second?
Well, that's what I thought we had questions.
Well, I
don't
mean,
think
about
he's had
the
a chance.
process, not about what Cindy has just gone over. My question is this. I certainly don't have any objection to reviewing and asking questions and making sure that we feel comfortable with it. I guess what I have an issue with is endorsing a recommendation when we don't have any of the background. All we have is what's been presented here today. So I'm asking, is it more appropriate to review it and offer our recommendation as opposed to a formal endorsement of this information?
Well, I actually had that. It was on the website, and I read all of the information and what the RFP was and the proposal. So if you want to take a recess and read it, then we can do that. But
The background information was provided with the agenda item last week.
yeah.
I mean, unless what's in there in the background isn't sufficient, but what's in with the background is the purchasing memo, a copy of all the scoring and ranking by committee member, a copy
that's
of
what
the
I'm saying.
transmittal memo provided by
What I have is
PMG.
this letter from Cindy to us, the letter to the PRMG, one letter with a copy of their scoring, the other scorings.
And the RFP.
and the letter from the company.
Yeah.
But I guess my issue is there were other companies involved. Then how are we supposed to, Mr. Chairman, I guess, endorse something when this is all we have? And I know it has to go to the council and be approved. But I guess my issue is more about how do we endorse it when we don't have any of the other data that backs this up, unless I missed something because I have been out of town.
Well, I guess what we're asking is if you guys are willing to endorse the staff's recommendation, if you feel comfortable that staff conducted a thorough analysis and that our recommendation is reasonable. So if you don't feel comfortable endorsing the staff recommendation as reasonable unless you've reviewed all the other proposals, then you can certainly vote no. I guess that's really what we're asking, is not that we're not asking you to endorse that you've read all the other proposals and you agree. It's more you think staff did their proper due diligence and that you think that's a reasonable recommendation based on the people involved in the committee and the scoring and the apparent qualifications of PRMG. Certainly, and now that I understand what you're after, if we do any of these in the future, if you want, I'll be happy to provide you with copies of all the proposals. I just didn't realize that you wanted that level of
What
detail.
I'm asking, I guess, is whether we endorse it or not. And if we endorse it based on just this information that we received here, is that sufficient to endorse something? That's my question.
It is for me.
I think the process is we had a committee of concerned people who chose the right one, and they came up with a recommendation, and we're saying we either confirm that recommendation or not, or we recommend that recommendation or not. We're not going to go back through and go through the same process they did. I don't think that's what we're being asked to do. I think we're just passing on that recommendation to the city council.
Yeah, no, I know it's like a lot of audits that you get. You don't necessarily approve it; you just accept it. And so that's my question: Are we doing it for the purpose of just saying, okay, on what we have here, it appears the due diligence was done. But when I read endorse, that made a different impression on me, and maybe it's just the terminology.
What would you suggest?
I don't think we can endorse it until we see it. I mean, I think all we're called upon right now is do we want to buy this study? Do we want to have the study done? Do we vote for it? Do we want to spend the money? I think that's all we can do. I had some questions. I don't know how much benefit it's going to be. I don't think it's going to hurt the city. I mean,
I think it's
a
an
different
enormous
type of
benefit.
study. After listening to Cindy, I understand it a little bit better. But I think all we can do is we either buy it or we don't buy it at this stage.
And even
Well,
actually
I
more
don't-
simplistically, what I'm asking for, let me make sure I'm clear as to what I'd like to take to council. I'm asking the Finance Commission to support the staff recommendation of Public Resources Management Group as the number one ranked firm. So essentially what I'm saying is, based on this information and your knowledge of the players involved in the selection committee and your knowledge of the city's process, do you feel comfortable that this committee made a reasonable recommendation of Public Resources Management Group as the number one ranked firm, or are you concerned that we picked the wrong firm? I mean, that's really more simplistically what I'm saying. We want to go to council and say we think PRMG is the right people. Do you have any concerns that we didn't pick the right person, or are you happy to say, look, it looks like this was we can endorse the staff recommendation of PRMG?
And not that this is the deciding factor in my vote, but were they the lowest price, or do you know what the prices were?
It isn't. It's only a portion of the scoring, but it so happens that they were the lowest price.
They did?
Mm-hmm. They were the lowest price.
Well,
But this
let
is
me
a-
make.
this is-
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
This is a process the city uses all the time. We've used it for determination of our insurance agencies. We used it for determination of who's going to audit the books this year. It's a process of keeping the community involved and spreading the talent out enough so that the staff gets input from outsiders as to the choices. And I've been in on several of the meetings. I think other people around the table have been. And I've always found that the staff does an excellent job of getting these RFPs out and writing them And given the committee's time to review what can be a sort of arduous work when you try to go through 6 or 7 or 8 of these proposals, and to say the least, they're difficult to try to get a fair comparison. But at the end of the day, if each of us at this podium sat down and tried to do it, we're going to be stacked up with paperwork, I'm telling you, in front of you. And I'm really impressed with the way the staff has handled it, the ones I've been on. And I'm comfortable with the process we have in place of 3 or 4 outside heads plus our staff reviewing it and then bringing it on to us to. And I don't think we're really endorsing it.
To be fair, you'd have to really.
It's a legal terminology that we're using. Endorsing is different than confirming that the staff has done it properly, and we support the staff and the outsiders for advice. And I think that's what we're doing here.
I think, to be fair, you'd have to sit in on all the interviews and listen to all the verbal stuff and the whole thing to be on the same par of the people on that committee.
Yeah.
They do a very thorough job, and I think what we're being asked to do is just support that work that they did.
I think so, too.
Let me make 2 points. One, first and foremost, I think this is important to do. I've always thought it was important to do because we need to have some documentation that supports what we're doing, first of all. Secondly, it does say recommend that we endorse. Now, having sat through many of these and sat through some with members of the committee here, we know what's involved in the process. And I have no doubt that it was handled very professionally. The whole issue for me is I don't feel comfortable endorsing something that is this. Now, if they want us to say that we believe it was a fair process or that the process was handled professionally and in accordance with past practices and all of that, I don't have a problem at all doing that. But I don't know how we can endorse a particular group when we don't have any additional information on the other groups. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, though, and I'm not endorsing this. I'm not endorsing the study because I haven't read it yet. I'm endorsing the procedure that staff followed to come up with a proposal, and I'm going to give it a shot. But
Well, I would just.
I may reject the study after I've had a chance to read it, assuming I understand it.
Are we just arguing about a word?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a word or our responsibilities, Mr. Chairman.
No, I believe what would you suggest then?
Well, that was what I was just saying. I don't know if it ought to be something that we've reviewed it, because that's what they ask us to do, review it and make comments and get additional information. And we've accomplished all of that. Now, if we're just going to endorse their process or support the process that they went through, then I don't have a problem with that.
Glenn, would you make a motion?
I'm going to make a motion to approve the staff's work in this electrical rate study to go forward to the city council.
I'll second that.
Yes.
Good second comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Cindy, I think that because Jim is here, rather than go into the budget amendment, because some of the comments that he will be making presumably would have an impact on not only this budget amendment, which is done, but in terms of going future. But it feeds into the whole budgeting process and the line items and what may change as we go forward. Jim, if you don't mind. No, I'm saying, but the items that are going to be discussed and the line items that were relevant last year may not be as relevant next year as we go into some examination. But Jim, I had asked before you came in to not only talk about what was presented in regard to ongoing negotiations with OUC, but the status of the actions that were taken and where we are with the intervening of Indian River Shores and the Indian River.
Okay, well, let me take the second one first. We're in mediation. We're not in litigation right now, legally speaking, if it can be, and our attorney's not here, but that's in theory where we are. So in the mediation process, which is by state law, we can't stop at phase 2 or step 3 or whatever. We have to go through all 3 steps. The first was administrative, which was held in order to sort of air out what the issues from Indian River Shores and now Indian River County are about. And it boils down to really 2 issues, well, actually 3 issues. One is that they want, at the termination of the franchise agreement, that we vacate all of the streets and operations within their corporate limits and in the county's governmental area. The second thing that they want is Florida Power and Light rates at that point when that happens. And the third thing that they're looking for is that we come to some possibly a process in which we have a transition of turning our assets over to a third party, either that but there would have to be a transitional period because obviously you don't want to turn somebody's lights out. And that would have to extend, theoretically, the franchise area, or the franchise period. From the city's standpoint, we are, and another item that they really wanted, or what the accusation is we did not hold an election back in 2008 for a utility authority to be established, and there's a state law that provides for that. So what we plan on doing, and we've gone through that phase 1, that administrative part. Now we're in phase 2, which all the governmental bodies will get together, and it's next week, and we'll be at the Richardson Center, and I forget what day it is, but all 3 elected panels will come together and discuss this. The process really follows is the city, in this particular case, who is making the demands, i.e. Indian River Shores, will come back, and we assume that they will reemphasize the things they want us out, Florida Power and Light rates, and that we didn't follow the state law in establishing of a utility authority. Assuming that occurs, we are prepared to say, first of all, we cannot meet Florida Power and Light rates. We said that in the first meeting, and that has not changed. And I'll go over some of the changes that we're looking at. But we are going to say that we are doing our best to bring our rates down. The second thing is we are prepared to say we will hold an election. As a matter of fact, we have written to the Supervisor of Elections of Indian River County, sent her a copy of the state law and said we need to have a referendum based on these parameters. And she wrote back and said that she can't do that. She has to use registered voters. Under the state law, it says 1 customer, 1 vote, which means like in your house, only 1 person gets to vote under that lives in that residence. If you're Walmart, you get 1 vote, and whoever is in Walmart. So you have those type of issues. She has no way of segregating that out. But what she has offered is that we would be able to use her machines, and she could come in and program the question that we would put that would be advised under that, and then she could have somebody sitting here, but we would have to be the responsible party for running the election. So the city clerk's office would be the one that would actually run the election. So we understand where the supervisor election is coming from, and that her database really does not provide for the way that the selection would go. But we are prepared to say that we understand that the election is something that, if that is the question, we can do it. We're also prepared, and the City Council has not voted on this yet. Obviously, none of the parties have voted, but administratively, we are prepared to say we will establish a utility authority. and under the parameters as set by that state law. So we would make sure that we have provisions in there that gives the rights for representation proportionate to the number of customers. So that's basically where we're going in this next step of the process. Now, coming back to what Chef Wright, who is our attorney, was talking about on the discussions we've had with OUC in order to try to bring our rates down, and we understand that the big portion of that, obviously, is the OUC rate structure. OUC provides approximately 60% of our power. OUC's rates, even though we all complain about them, are really the lowest of the rates that we presently receive. And one of the ways that we keep our rates where they are today is that we blend that with FMPA, and FMPA does have higher rates than what we purchase from OUC. But OUC we felt was the big nut we had to crush through in order to try to get to something that would be workable and usable. OUC put on the table that they would, adjust the capacity factor and bring that number down. And that, as a matter of fact, where we're at about 1350 or something, they were going to come down, including transmission, somewhere in the neighborhood of 675. So we were getting a very good deal there. But there were a couple of caveats to that. One is that the other thing we wanted to do is take our power plant offline and try to figure out how we could do the transmission study and that process. But before we could even make that decision, we had to get OUC permission. They gave us the permission and said, as long as we get to sell you the capacity, then we have no problem with the removal of the plant offline. And to sweeten the deal a little bit better, we will give you that capacity under a demand provision as opposed to a strict capacity charge. So we worked out where we're guaranteeing 85 megawatts under the capacity allotment, and then we have the remaining balance, which is about 58 megawatts, under a demand charge. That means that when we use it, we have to pay a higher price, but it would only be charged at the time that we would purchase it. So we worked through those two exercises, and so in order to make this happen, in order to get timing, we have to ask Florida Power and Light to do a transmission study. We're in the process of doing that, and one of the ways that you get that transmission study done, the way we understand the rules of that, we have to show where we're going to receive the capacity that will be displacing the power plant in order to do the transmission study. That way, when the transmission study's done, then they'll know where this power is going to come from. So we feel like that we're very close there in that exercise, and so then we'll get the transmission study done. And then when the transmission study is done, then that will tell us what we will have to do to upgrade transmission facilities in order to be able to take this 58 megawatts. Now, in the transmission study and the way that it is defined under the provisions, the utility that's required to do the transmission study has the right to charge the requesting party, i.e. us in this particular case. But at the same time, the utility that is doing the transmission study, if they're doing upgrades to their facilities, then theoretically we don't pay for that. We have to do upgrades to our facilities. For example, if a transformer has to be placed at the Emerson substation, then that would be our total responsibility and payment for doing that. So we have to work through some of the parameters of this transmission study to really get a grasp on how much that's going to cost to replace the power plant. In the scenario that Chef Wright laid out to the City Council, we feel like that it's going to be a wash between what we pay for demand charge and taking down the power plant. Now, in realities, that's not going to be really accurate, especially going in the out years. I use the example of going from a defined benefit plan in the pension to a defined contribution. Once you get rid of the power plant, then you don't have that undefined expenses that you may have going forward with a plant that's 60 years old, and the conditions of fuels and all those other things that happen in the plant. Now, we do have, and part of our fixed cost will be to monitor the plant, because what we plan to do is really take it offline. We'll take everything we can out of it, maybe salvage the materials that we can salvage, but it'll sort of be in a retirement stage where we'll still have to provide security. We don't plan to move the substation under this scenario, and the substation will stay, and part of it is inside the plant, so the structure would have to stay for at least the time the substation was there. Obviously, the city council sometime in the future could say we're going to remove it from the waterfront and move the substation someplace else, but what we're looking at is the most cost-benefit way of doing it at this point. The rates that we would be charged from OUC would save us approximately $7 million a year. And then the other thing, by taking the plant offline, we get out of the NERC regulations, and we think there's a little bit of a savings, and we programmed in about $150,000. If you put all the savings that we anticipate from that, it would bring your price per 1,000 kilowatts down about $10. Every $1 million represents 1.23 right now, $1.23 per 1,000. And so that's where we're coming up with the $10 per 1,000. Chef was it was very important the way he explained it, assuming everything remains the same, i.e. that the cost of fuels don't go up, the cost of other suppliers to us don't go up, then we would be at about 113. But the realities are, the way that the number has jumped around, we don't know what it would be. We're just saying that under this new contract, we would be saving about $10 per 1,000 kilowatts. Now, on top of that, OUC also wants the option to purchase our St. Lucie. That's our nuclear facility, and is probably our lowest cost, except they would still have to take it through FMPA, so there's some overhead that whoever, if they exercise that option, they would have to absorb that too, because they would be taking 100% of the cost. But in that discussion, it was pointed out, and let's say that the St. Lucie has a 60-year life, and we've used it for 40 years, and OUC uses it for 20, then when you get to the decommissioning charges, and we've been paying decommissioning charges all along, and according to the audits from FPL, we're right on the numbers. They don't have any issues, but at the end of the time, you have a decommissioning cost, and that decommissioning takes 40 to 45 years, even beyond the time that they start. So you have that cost in there of doing that. Let's say that we've overpaid for some reason, then we would only get 40%, our percentage back of the contributions. OUC would get their percentage back of their contributions. If it was an overrun, we would be responsible for our percentage of the operation, and they would be responsible for their percentage of the operation going forward. So they did want that option. Another option that they wanted is in 2020, the option to terminate the contract of supply to the city. It's 20 or 21. The reason that they want that option is because if they have to build new generation, they do not want to have a higher cost of construction of generation than it's going to cost them to service their wholesale load. In our discussions with their upper management, they made it very clear we are a retail supplier. The wholesale contracts that we have done were really those marginal cost contracts, and that we do not ever want to lose sight that we're going to serve our native load over and above any wholesale contracts. Well, right now they're locked into us for till 2029. And so they wanted that option that they would be able to, that they could get out. If they did that, for example, if they exercised the option today, we'd all probably feel pretty good about it because we'd be out on the market. And the theory is that we would go to market to purchase that capacity and that demand charge, if in fact we wanted a demand charge depending on how much capacity we purchased, at the market prices of that particular time. So those were the two major provisos that they put in their conditions of providing that power. The question is it worth, and the $7 million is projected over the first 3 years. It goes down to like $4 million after that. But once you get past 3 years, you're really in a major projection issue that I'm not sure anybody could really be that accurate on. But the first 3 years, we're going to save somewhere in the neighborhood of $21 million. Is that worth giving up the St. Lucie plant and the right for them to exercise an option to force us to go to market to purchase capacity? Those are the two main issues that I think that we, the city, are going to have to debate and discuss as to is it worth that in order to make that work. The key is to try to drive our rates down, understanding that we're not going to be the lowest in the state. But under this scenario, based on what we see happening in the market today, we would be in the lower quadrant of the charges in the state of Florida. We would be below Duke Power as an example, and I don't think we'll ever get above Duke Power anytime because they're on this way up, and we're trying to at least levelize ours. But we'd be lower than Gulf Power. We would be higher than Florida Power and Light and Tampa Electric. Tampa Electric has converted a lot of their coal plants into combustion turbines and gas, so they look like they're on a pretty good future going forward there. But there would be about 4 cities below us, and we would be down into that, out of the 32 municipals that provide utilities. And I know nobody really wants to hear that, we're going to be lower than Gainesville as an example, but at the same time, we need to put it out and make sure that we have it in perspective as to where we are. But we have never made any inference that we could beat Florida Power and Light, and based on the future and the futures of gas and what fracking's doing, I don't think there's anyone in the state that's going to really beat Florida Power and Light as a low-cost provider. The question came up in the discussion. If we exercise this contract, does that prohibit us, or does that put us in a more negative role in trying to sell the system to Florida Power and Light? And Chef's answer was yes, in the fact that we have less assets. The other thing that, and I forgot this, is the gas that OUC wanted, and we have PA consultants said it was worth about $10 million. The realities are, if OUC does nothing, they own the gas, because under the contract they control the gas until 2029. So it's not an asset that's on our books anywhere because we don't really dispatch it, we don't use it. But the gas asset would go. If we lost the St. Lucie, then those are two assets that we would have that, in theory, somebody could use going into the future. Again, that's debatable. We don't know what scenario we would sell our system other than Florida Power and Light, because if we're going to have Florida Power and Light rates, that's the only place to get it is Florida Power and Light rates. If we could spend this, what we have, off to another city, and let's say another Winter Park comes up and decides they want to get into the utility business, or a city, and I don't want to use any city names because I think Chef used Gainesville as an example, and because Gainesville has some issues with renewable resources that's driving their prices up. So I don't want to use any names, but if for some reason the Stanton plants became a cheaper price of generation than some other city was using, then obviously this deal could be closed and could be done because we would have a municipal buyer for our. And so that's the type of debate and discussion that will go on as to how we go forward in the process.
Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah, Jim, has the city, I couldn't see all the meeting Tuesday night, has the city council approved Mr. Wright's proposal? Is it going to be given?
No, because we still have a lot of details.
Okay.
We don't really have a written proposal. What they did is he told them what he was going to be presenting next week as part of the process.
It is going to be presented Tuesday?
Well, I'm sure it'll be discussed because our position is going to be we're trying to drive our rates down. This is a way that we're looking at as an option of doing that.
Okay, and it's not available to be seen before Tuesday. Is that it? Or?
We do have the letter.
Yeah,
haven't seen it.
absolutely.
Maybe I didn't. Can I get a copy? Right. And then maybe you said it and I didn't hear it, but in regard to the town suit against us, they also have a count for damages. Right?
Yes, they do, but the call for damages is really.
Well, they have to prevail to get it, but if they did prevail and they could
Even if they prevailed in all the other counts, Dan, just to be very frank with you, if our rates were the highest in the state, if we were charging Key West rates, Gainesville rates, that would be unreasonable. The damages that I think they're looking for would be very difficult. I mean, we can show our rate of return is 6%. We have utilities in the state that are at 10 to 12%. So that would be, of all the charges, that's the one that we have less issue with, I guess, because there's no real way of addressing that one.
Okay. And then I would assume, without getting in the litigation merits, whatever offer is being made to the Shores would be for them to drop their lawsuit, right?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Almost goes without saying.
But we're only in the second phase of this mediation program. Where do we go from here? How many more days do we have in the mediation program?
Well, it was supposed to be done like in 90 days, but we both extended it, for example, in the first phase, and we didn't meet the deadlines of that. So in both, all three parties agreed because the county had to have a meeting in order to get involved. And so the second stage, if we had two meetings, then it obviously would even kick it out further because the third stage, assuming that we have to go there, will be the real mediation, and that's when you bring in a certified mediator, and it becomes an administrative function again, and the councils are not involved. That becomes one where I and Robbie and Joe probably go to 3 different rooms, and the guy goes around and talks to us as to what's going to do. And then we would come back, and that would be totally contingent on the council action following that process. That one would probably be only a one-time sit-down is the way we would envision that. The first step, I think, was the critical and did require a couple of meetings in order to make sure we flushed all the issues out. And it's my understanding either today or tomorrow, I should get an agenda that's being created in Indian River Shores. And since they're the ones making the complaint, they sort of do all the agendas and sort of hold the meetings. And we're supposed to get a copy of that agenda, and then I'll have a much better feel for it. But what I've told you is what we anticipate occurring.
Are all the issues in one package so that if it's decided against our city, all the issues are in favor of Indian River Shores, or can it be issue by issue?
It really is an issue by issue, and it comes down to the different charges, and each one have an element. And let's don't forget now, Indian River County has appealed directly to the Public Service Commission. November the 13th is, and I hope that's not a Friday, but is when the Public Service Commission staff is supposed to render a recommendation to the PSC, and I think it's 10 days after that, right around Thanksgiving, is when the Public Service Commission will sit down and review the staff's recommendations and make give an order at that point. Then that order comes back. Now, what impact that has is debatable. For example, Indian River Shores attorney, Bruce May, has said that has no relevance to us. That's a totally different group. Our position has been up to this point is that you're talking about a franchise, you're talking about a service territory. You have the franchise given by the local government, you have a service territory that's given by the state. And the city's position is that we took and executed contracts for capacity in order to serve our service area as dictated by the state. In the Indian River Shores, they're saying we have the governance, and so therefore we have directive over this franchise area. Now, in a court's process, anything could come out. And Dan, I'm sure you're aware that, depending on the judge or whoever it is that makes the determination, it could be that the city of Vero Beach wins or the city of Indian River Shores wins, or it could be something in between that says, well, you don't necessarily have to take your facilities out and somebody has to pay you for that. And then we're going to get, assuming if that happens, then you get into the debate of what is stranded cost. It's not just the wires, it's not just the transformers. And I just hope I live long enough if we had to go through that exercise, because then you're getting down into the details and that becomes another whole issue. But if there was a clear-cut determination in a court that says, City of Vero Beach, you lose, we want your wires out of there by X date, then we would have to remove our wires or appeal, of course. If Indian River Shores loses, they obviously have the right to say, we still feel like we're in the right, and they have the right to appeal, and we go through that exercise. So it's an undetermined result, but the courts, in essence, will take it. We assume they will take it piece by piece because there are very strategic and significant elements in the filing. And if we're found guilty, for example, of not running the election in 2008, again, we are prepared to do that. That's administratively, council hasn't ruled on that yet either. We have no real issue or problem with that.
But as you point out, there are really two separate, if not parallel tracks. One is a legal action and the other is an administrative action with the PSC.
That is correct. The PSC is not a legal action, but the county has joined in on the legal action with the Indian River Shores and has become a party to that. So it is. And they both play sort of into the negotiations with OUC in the fact that, when we start debating, do we want to, give up our rights to St. Lucie as an example in that process, then that's going to be part of, some of the debate that will take place.
Would there be any option for City of Vero Beach to be compensated for any expenses should the City of Vero Beach win?
Peter, I don't know the ins and outs, but typically local governments recovering costs in a court, everybody has a right to take on a local government, a state government, or whoever. And I'm not sure I've ever heard of a recovery of cost, and that would fall with Indian River Shores or Indian River County as well. I don't think there's a recovery of cost, unless I can't even imagine how there would be a recovery, because everybody has the right to redress a local government, even another local government.
But I had some comments. One of them has to do that if we do nothing, let's put aside these events, we're still locked into the 2029 contract. If we do nothing, and then it comes to the end of 2016, we don't. And if we can't get closure on a deal with FPL, we're locked into what we have now. The second point is that you've only addressed the OUC element of potential reduction of rates. We had talked earlier about the RFP for optimization. We talked about the rate structures, which in fact may impact and provide some additional, I'm not saying it's major, Now, in 2021-22, $5,300,000 in debt payments fall out of the expenses of the electric utility on debt payments that we have today. And additionally, and this is going further, but it does get to 29, and that is the $4 million being paid to catch up on the pension fund within the next decade, which would be 2024. That's another $4 million. I'm just projecting on current rates that would fall out of of the city's. About a third of that, by my calculation, of that pension recovery of the fund could be attributed to VBE. I mean, this is back of the envelope, and since we're talking about going on, but some of the obligations, the contingent liability obligations that was brought up, as you recall, and Chef made this point, when FMPA refused to take the $52 million payout from proposed by FPL. And that didn't even consider OUC's $34 million, but the $52 million, because they would not release contingent liabilities. At that point, FP&L came to the city of Vero Beach and said, all right, we're backing out. You, the city of Vero Beach, are going to have to negotiate with FMPA and OUC. Is that correct?
No, FP&L did not say. FP&L said we want to keep the contract in abeyance and search for other options of finding how to unload our power purchase contracts. They are sort of doing their thing. I presume they're doing their thing because we check in with them periodically, but at the same time, if we can find another buyer through any mechanism that we have available, and Chef is always looking at that as a possibility. The negotiating with OUC was really trying to get our rates down as it stands now. In our discussions with FMPA that we've had, and we've had several, because they have told us all along they're going to help us. But in the process, we do check with them and have tried to address the issue of renegotiating with them our power supply contracts. And as it's pointed out, and you can ask the city manager in Jacksonville Beach, or you can ask the utility director in Kissimmee, if they give it to you, they're going to give it to us, and so somebody has to eat that. So they're not very flexible in that process because of the numbers. But no, our agreement with FP&L, as it stands right now, is that both sides will continue to look at other options and negotiations if at all possible. FP&L did say that it did break down between their negotiations with OUC and trying to shift that. We have to just look at other ideas.
And that was my point. I guess I misspoke myself. But that FPL was actively engaged with the city of Vero Beach in negotiating with FMPA. And now they have withdrawn, as I understand it, from negotiations. Direct negotiations with FMPA, and that's one of the reasons I presume that Mr. Wright this was even prior to some of the lawsuits, was brought on board to look at what other options, as you were addressing, could be forwarded.
That is correct. I mean, the bottom line is he was brought on board because he was much more familiar with the regulatory areas and the contracts with FMPA. And now we have to find a whole new concept. And he was very clear, the contract that we presently have cannot be executed without substantial amendments or changes to that contract, because it specifically says OUC, and it specifically says all the details that would have to go back in. It's not going to be as easy as, let's say, take city X and plug them in and say, okay, this all goes. It's going to be a little more complicated than that. So we understand that would have to be modified, and FP&L understands that as well, and they are prepared to do that if we can just find a power supply depository somewhere, and that's really the only way to make this thing work.
Hey, Jim, could you correct me if I'm wrong, but on this subject of the $52 million payment by FP&L to FMPA, as to how that originated, I think is debatable. My understanding that FP&L went to FMPA after this contract stalled and asked them, what will you take to allow us to close this sale? And I understood FP&L waited about 3 or 4 months to get a response from FMPA, and the response was $52 million. And I believe FP&L studied it for about a month, and then they made this offer to the city that we'll pay it all, and then we'll recoup $26 million from the city. And there was a public hearing on it, I believe, at the end of April, first part of May, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah.
And the city just rejected it, and I think that's very regrettable. Rather than making a counter offer to FMPA, we just dismissed it.
Dan, that's not exactly how it went. First of all, I'm not sure it was 4 or 5 months, but there was 3 or 4 months in there
Right.
that when FP&L and ourselves, we were at the same table, said, what is it going to take? FMPA did come back with the $52 million number, and that was generated from them. Then it came as to FP&L said, we will pay half if you'll pay half. And so we made the presentation. It was before the council could really take any action on it that FMPA withdrew and said, wait a minute, $52 million doesn't cover what we now identify as our cost. So I don't think we ever got into a vote because it was a process of the $52 million was taken off the table.
Okay, fine. But then that leads up to my point then. As I see it, with FMPA's position, as you've just described it, and what I believe everyone who's associated with this litigation has a point on it, or opinion on it. It's the position of FMPA that is the reason why we can't close this sale, and it has been. And now lately, OUC. Okay, then they are necessary parties to this action. I don't see how any court, and we're being sued in court, I understand now by the county, you say the county has joined in the lawsuit? with them?
Yes, sir, they are party to the mediation process. And it's so after you get out of the mediations when you go into the lawsuit.
Okay.
Right now, legally speaking, we are not in a lawsuit. We're in mediation.
All right. But we are with the town, and if they're not brought into this lawsuit, how do you think we can settle it? But Peter just mentioned we still have these outstanding contracts. If somehow we can get an agreement with the town, you know.
I don't think you're going to be able to bring, now this is, and I'm not an attorney and I'm not trying to play one on TV, but the fact of the matter is you've got to have something to bring FMPA into the litigation. And until you could find a crack in one of our contracts, and we've had an awful lot of attorneys that have poured over that many times, you just can't say Indian River Shores is suing us because our rates are too high and the cause is FMPA, so we wouldn't sue FMPA. The Indian River Shores might be able to sue them, but there again, that you have to have a cause of action other than that we have a contract, because in theory then they should sue OUC.
All right.
So, and I'm not sure how you bring that, again, the cause of action for that. I mean, other than the fact that the city, and I'm not saying we're the responsible party, we have any liability and all that, the disclaimers that, but the fact of the matter is we signed contracts.
We did, and we have a contractual obligation with FMPA.
That is correct.
And OUC. And if we're being sued by a third party, the town, and for refusing to allow them to get out of the service agreement and to stop being a customer, and also for damages. And their damages claim that we were unreasonable in the way we regulated our electric system. And our response is, well, we had to regulate it that way because of our obligations to OUC. Then for my opinion, for what it's worth, that's grounds for a third-party complaint. But, you know, if other lawyers say otherwise, you know, the city has to go with them. But it's going to be very difficult for a court if this goes to trial, and some of it could be a jury trial. How they can render a judgment when the people, OUC is going to be affected by this case.
And
how can a
FMPA.
court give a decision that's going to affect someone who's not a party, who's not before them?
Well, the irony is that gives standing to FMPA and OUC to sue us or to intervene at some point, because if we're giving up 60% of our customers, we've signed contracts that said our obligation is to pay those things. If let's say that we lose all those cases, and there's been a concept, well, we just file for bankruptcy. There's no bankruptcy court in the world that's going to let you file for bankruptcy when you still have 30,000 customers. I mean, not 30,000, but you'd have 40% of your 35 or 33,000 customers, because it's just a function of this is how much it cost.
But,
It might be a way to work out a settlement, though, with them. OUC, you're saying now they're willing to give a little bit on these contracts in order to reduce rates.
Correct.
They may give a little bit more if they're subject to the court's jurisdiction.
Well, yeah, if and if Indian River Shores wanted to go after the contracts, but they have given no indication of that at this point.
But ignoring the legal issues a little bit, because it seems to me now we're in another 2-year time horizon, looking at all the details you're trying to do. And we're talking about another 2 years out here. Let's be candid about it. Forget the legal bills for a moment. The obvious solution that's being toyed with, and I guess there's a parallel route being taken, is who is exploring the electrical authority? I mean, how is that being explored? Who's working on that program? Is that a possibility to really work, Jim?
It really is, Glenn.
I mean, it seems to me that's the logical end here.
The city has file after file after file on utility authorities. We've studied them till we were dead.
Okay.
We have given most of those that we think would be applicable to the city of Vero Beach, to Chef Wright,
Okay.
who is using that as sort of the model to go after as to how we would structure ours. Because as we understand it, the number one thing that the Indian River Shores wants is the representation equal to all the parties involved. If that's the case, how do we structure that? I've personally been in touch with Kissimmee, because they have a utility authority there, and they have representation from outside the city and this type of stuff.
Right.
In their particular case, the city council still makes the ultimate decisions. The other thing that we're hearing from Indian River Shores is if you have a utility authority and we're representing it, we should be able to set the rates. So we're exploring how that would be accommodated under that scenario. So there's multiple ways of doing a utility authority, and we're trying to figure out the one that, because we have two things that are going to be critical to our utility authority. One is the contracts we have to travel to that utility
Correct.
authority,
Yeah.
because we have an obligation on that. And the second thing is that we've got to have a utility authority that understands that you've got to maintain the system and utility standards of the era. And so therefore you've got to make investments into the utility, keep the lights on type of thing. And so yeah, well,
you can't just set rates to be lower because you want them to, because tuition doesn't.
No, absolutely.
So you still have to cover your costs.
I mean, it has
right?
to be a standing company that can make sense of its own.
That is
and
correct.
And a board that can handle that type of
That
deal.
is correct. And so that's what we're trying to explore, is how you put all that together that would accommodate that.
But even then, the reality is we'd have to have all of our underlying note holders and all of the suppliers are affected. The bond ratings of the suppliers are. So the city itself is not getting off the liability. It may be transferring to a new authority, but it's unlikely we'd ever get released from a lot of these liabilities.
And the others won't pick up the 60%, won't pick up 60% of the liability either.
What's that?
And the people that the 60% that's not part of the city don't have any liability.
That's right. I mean, that's exactly right.
Unless you structure the utility authority.
Correct.
Now, FMPA has to be, again, party to this because they have
Sure.
to approve how their contracts are going to be maneuvered in the future.
Sure.
But you could theoretically structure a utility authority that takes the liability and the responsibility of all of those
Yes.
Right.
items, and then they become the responsible party. And then if you serve on that board, then you become fiduciary responsible for the actions that you take within the
Correct.
scope of operation. But you could, and that would take a state charter, but you could establish a state charter, and this would be like a co-op, would be similar
Right.
to what it in nature.
And for instance, if they borrowed enough money to give to us to defease our bonds, they would end up with a bond issue that was
Right.
a responsibility
If
of the
the revenue
utilities.
flows would support the bonds. I mean, we could, absolutely. But we are pursuing that course as we're going, and I presume we're interfacing with the city and the county. They must be doing the same sort of
No,
work.
well, I presume they may be doing the same type of work since the demand is from
Yeah.
them as to what they want. From our perspective,
Yeah.
we're trying to get a handle on it, and based on what we have seen in operation in other areas, my recommendation to the city council is that I have absolutely no. As a matter of fact, when I first got here 3 years ago, I said the utility authority was not a major issue as far as I was concerned. It gives the representation and all that. It's legally how you set it up and how you deface it from, if you want to deface it from the city. But we, the city, are working on that because that's the demand on us. We have not engaged with the Indian River Shores or
Correct.
Indian River County.
But going forward, I mean, if we all sit around the table here today and said, I'm listening carefully to this, it's pretty clear to me we're in another 2-year transition time all this work's done. There's a lot of work here.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, we got this authority that seems to be ongoing. That's certainly another whole legal issue. Just getting that put together is going to be a 2-year deal. And I presume, looking down the road, that the question is going to be how urgent is the issue with our two adversaries right at the moment? Not really adversaries, but the city and the county. I mean, they're an intelligent group. They can clearly see we can't make these type of transitions in anywhere a short period of time. This is a 2-year job. I don't care how you cut it, right?
And the 2 years,
It's going to be tight to do it in 2 years.
and in 2 years, the PPA with FPL and Vero Beach expires.
Well, irrespective of that.
No. I'm just
you're
making
right,
that
but-
point. And the other part of that is
But what I'm trying to get at is there's no really reason for any of us to be in a legal fight. I mean, neither us nor the county or the city, the shores. What we all need to do is put the funds together and figure out how this authority works. That's the solution, right?
Glenn, if that is the number one issue, I will tell you that they've placed equal value on all of those.
They do.
When we've had those discussions in our last two meetings, the Florida Power and Light rates was the first thing that was
I heard
broached,
that, yes.
and they said at both of the meetings we accept nothing less than that. And if that's the case, then we can't meet that first threshold. The other two, if we could defease part of the litigation and maybe only litigate FP&L rates, if we can defease the other issues, then maybe we could boil it down. But as it stands right now, everything within that, even the damages, are part of the discussion. But and if they put equal standing on all of those, and they've given no indication that this ranks number one, this is number two, this is number three, and I'm not sure they could do that anyway, the way the suit's been filed.
Well, it's too early in the negotiating stage. They obviously got to throw everything they can throw at us as hard as they can, and they're doing it.
Yeah.
But when you sit it down and think about it carefully, they know deep down they can't get Florida Power and Light rates, and I don't care if it's today or 2 years from now. We're not there, and they're not going to be able to get this. It'll take a 2-year lawsuit to get that, and we'll eat each other alive doing that. The reality is we're going to sit down and put something together that works financially. It's the only thing we can do that I see. So I know I'm hearing them, but I don't think that's their position in the final analysis. We'll work it out. And that's why I don't think for us in the city to spend a lot of time worrying about the litigation we're peanuts up against elephants, and they can outspend us, and we can't keep up with that type of expenditure.
I think that's part of the strategy.
Right, Randy?
I think it's part of the strategy.
Yeah.
The unfortunate part is we don't have any option. We have to keep up.
Yeah.
Oh, I
with
understand.
relevant.
But we don't. But you're right. But we don't have to voluntarily get into lawsuits when we need to be looking elsewhere to settlement.
And we have sued no one, so we're not voluntarily getting into anything.
Right. And
Ours is
we want to. We don't want to be there.
Yeah, this is totally a third party action against us, but we have to defend our position, and that's what we are preparing to do.
You're right. We need to put enough negotiation on the table to stall the development out of it for as long as we can stall. That's what normally happens, at as low a cost as we can get, while we solve these other issues.
And the expenses of all this litigation goes into the rates and increase the rates.
Exactly right.
But-
Well, it may not, because the reality is we may, to make this ring really work, we may very well have to be negotiating some of our 6% out of our bottom line to keep out of the lawsuits.
It's in there.
The transfers.
Yeah.
We may have to negotiate part of that down to keep this from, morphing into a ridiculous lawsuit that has no end to it.
Think maybe the county would give up part of their 6%?
Excuse me?
Think perhaps the county would give up part of their 6% too?
Maybe that's part of it. I mean, we have to put it all on the table. I mean, it's
And
on the
Glenn,
table anyway.
our position is that we have to respond to their,
Sure.
and that's really where we are, and we are trying to respond to each one of those counts and those elements and saying, this is what we're doing. And they either accept or reject. We don't have an option there. It's not like we can
No,
say,
I
let's
know,
sit around
Jim.
the table and negotiate this. Because, again, their position has not changed over the last two meetings that we've had, and we have seen no indication from their attorneys, even in the informal discussions with our attorney, that there is any give or waive there as to what they want. And,
Sure.
and going back and saying that we're going to bring FMPA and OUC into the suit, they may get into the suit if we start losing for some reason, and it starts putting their bonds at risk. But I'm just not sure that we could go back and say we have to have our rates because of our contracts that we sign with our providers, so therefore our providers are a responsible party. We haven't figured that part out. If there is a crack in our contract, if there's something that was done that jeopardizes the legality of the contracts, then that's a totally different picture. And if there's a way for us to get out of the contract.
But we haven't found that after spending $1.5 million. We haven't found that.
No, sir, we have not.
No, we haven't.
Glenn and Peter, one way we could get out of this litigation, just capitulate and give the town of Indian River Shores what they want. We could do that. I'm not advocating it, but I mean,
but you got to remember, you can't treat one different than the other. If you capitulate to the Indian River Shores, you got to do the same thing to the county.
Right.
I don't think the county's going to sit idly by and say, "Well, wait a minute."
Well, and
except that we're being sued by the town. We're not being sued by the county, and they're going to the Public Service Commission. So
Dan, again, legally, we're not being sued by
sued.
anybody.
Yeah.
There is no lawsuit right now.
Okay.
We're in mediation by state law.
Right.
Okay, at the end of that. Now, the county has asked to be part of the mediation, which implies at the end of this, if we don't come to a resolution, they become part of the litigation.
All right. Well, let's just extend the hypothetical. Assuming we were being sued by both and we capitulated.
60%.
60% of our customer base is gone, but they're gone. They get their FP&L rates, and the city residents are stuck, and the city ratepayers are stuck with Vero Electric,
Correct.
which most of them don't want. They voiced an opinion through the referendum. They want FP&L, but liquidity. We don't have it to make our payments to OUC and FMPA and all these other.
Yes, we do. We have ratepayers.
Yeah, but Dan, here,
Okay, just a minute, Glenn. Is that are ratepayers here in the city enough to make all our obligations?
Oh, yes, sir. The rates just have to be higher. And as we projected, our rates.
No, I mean, I meant Jim, the current rates.
No. No.
Okay.
No.
How much higher would we have to raise them
A minimum of about 30%.
yeah.
Okay, and keep our tax rate the same?
No, sir. your tax rate would have to go up about 50%.
Yeah, 50.
Okay. And of course, this is all subject to resident approval, voter approval. If they say no, our property,
They have, actually, we can go up almost 40% without a vote.
I stand corrected. If the council agrees to raise everything, they stand the risk of being voted out of office, as has happened in the past. The point I'm trying to make is, unless we do these raises at our current revenue level, we can't make these payments to OUC. At our current rates, at our current
rates.
No, okay, you're right.
So if we
Not
don't
without
do
60%
it,
of it. We're not without all our customers.
But
then we would get sued, wouldn't we? But let's say we didn't
yes,
make.
the bondholders would sue us.
Yeah, the bondholders.
And they would demand that we go up on our rates.
Okay.
And
And then
that's-
we have a reorganization or a bankruptcy or in some court.
No, sir. No, sir. The demand would be you go up on your rates. You don't go into bankruptcy if you have a way of getting revenues. We have pledged our rates to those bonds. And so the the bondholders, they don't care if you go up 50% on your rates. You go up on your rates to make my bond. Otherwise, you're personally liable as a fiduciary responsible party. And you just can't say, I'm not going to pay that. You can't go into bankruptcy when you have ratepayers. You go into bankruptcy when all your ratepayers are gone. But as long as we have even 40%, you still have ratepayers. And so, and that's why I say, from a standpoint of FMPA, if we were going to lose 60% of our ratepayers, I would anticipate they would be part of that fray, because then they know that we would go up, we'd be up another 50% on our rates, 30%, 50%, whatever the number is, to collect the revenues to pay them. And what their argument would be is, wait a minute, you're giving away a substantial number, whether it's through court or however it's done, a substantial number and a substantial amount of what you've pledged to us as your assets. And so we have pledged those ratepayers will be making utility payments on our system. And if you give 60% of them up, I think a case could be made you're giving up a substantial amount of your pledge. And that's where it would be. Similar to any bond that we would have in the city, that
So
you just can't say, I'm not going to pay it tomorrow.
If I'm hearing you correctly, then, if we would agree to let the county and the shores go, FMPA would sue us?
Possibly.
So that's the way to get them in court.
Yeah, but then we're fighting two lawsuits.
Yeah,
I mean, that,
capitulation would not be a good idea.
No,
Plus
that won't work.
You're playing poker with the continued livelihood of the city of Vero Beach.
I don't see that,
It's a great
Dan.
idea.
I think Jim's right. We have to handle this as carefully as we can, as low a cost as we can, stall as long as we can, and while we're doing all that, explore the electrical authorities and figure out if we can make that transition, because it's a money deal. It's not a legal deal now. We have to figure out how the money works.
and I agree. I think that's...
Is that right?
Yeah, it's always follow the money.
Yeah, follow the money.
I think there's one other thing, and I think in the authority somehow there's got to be some utility expertise. And yes. I don't know how that works, but there's got to be some knowledge in there, and it can't be just us kind of guys running this authority.
No, that's right. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems we got. Why we're in this problem is we didn't have that type of expertise.
Yeah.
Just so you understand that the representation means the representation of the type of the residents of that community. You're not going to be able to say we need 4 engineers and 4 architects and 4 this, that, and the other. So it's going to be made up of people like you all. And now there are several ways of getting appointments. For example, it could be one of those self-appointment type of boards. Mm-hmm. The second is you have elections in the territorial areas as described. The third is that the elected bodies appoint their representatives, whoever that may be, on the authority. So you have several mechanisms by which to get people on there, but to think you're going to be able to allocate expertise to the board, I'm just not sure. We've never encountered that yet as to how you would do it.
But what you do have is the board will have and can have professional staff as well as outside consultants who
Absolutely.
do rate studies,
Yeah.
who provide, bond and financing expertise.
Right.
So then the question becomes, will the elected board listen to the professional advice, or will they make other decisions? And that's
Yeah, but
what you're all stuck with.
there's so many stranded costs or end problems with all this, particularly the nuclear issue. It's one thing for the city to be on the hook for that because it's a long-term, 1,000-year life operation, theoretically. It's another thing to transfer that type of liability to some new corporation or authority. So there is some issue of that stranded cost situation liability. But longer run, it appears to me that we really need to be thinking about that. And the question I would have as we're going forward is, are we forming a committee to begin to help you guys and looking at some of this stuff? Is somebody helping you review?
The answer, Glenn, is no, we haven't, because we still are formulating the defense of the city.
Right.
And by going out and forming a committee to sit around and come up with options and alternatives is not really, I don't think, it's a strategy for litigation. And even though we're not technically in litigation now, we anticipate, if we can't come to a resolution over the next 2 meetings, that we will be in litigation. And as fond as we are of committees in the city of Vero Beach, it's not the way we're going to get through litigation. Now, if for some reason during this process, Indian River Shores, as an example, says, okay, we're going to withhold our litigation, let's form a tactical committee made up of Indian River Shores, Indian River County, and ourselves, and study the issue, then I think the city of Vero Beach, again, the city council would have to vote on that, we would be all for it. But that's not something that we have control over, because the way that Bruce May has laid it out to us, who's their attorney, is this is the process we're going to follow. And again, we have not seen any change in their process.
It's too early in the game. I understand. Yeah. It's too early in the game. Yeah.
If I may get back to your, what you were presenting, the OUC negotiation. What was the worst scenario with that? You did mention that we have potential cost savings, but they could erode if prices of things went up, and we would be giving up certain assets to make this deal. So could we lose our savings and be out our assets? I mean, what's the worst scenario?
No, you would still have savings, but it would not be. You would not be at 113 as an example. And we got to remember, 40% of our power supply contract is going to come from FMPA, and this has nothing to do with them. The lower we get the OUC rate, the more we can blend with FMPA and keep the whole thing down. But let's say FMPA skyrocketed for some reason, then obviously we would still be saving amount of money on our OUC contract. And that's why I am very hesitant about giving any numbers out. We use the 123.90 because that's what our rates are today, but that could change next July. Then the giving away or selling the assets, and I don't like giving it away, because if we do save $21 million, no matter what that's on, then what we're doing is making a decision, a financial decision. Is it worth $21 million to us to sell our portion of St. Lucie nuclear plant? And is it worth that to allow OUC to exit our contract after 5 years? Is that worth $21 million? And that's the determination that we have to make. Part of the school of thought is, well, between now and when 216 comes around, should we hold on and wait to 2016, because at that time then we'll have determined our best efforts of selling this system to Florida Power and Light, and if that shouldn't take place, then we pursue the OUC contracts. The negative to that is you're going to be eating that $7 million next year that we could have transferred out. So again, coming back to what somebody said, you follow the dollars, and that's the decision that we have to make. The term of the contracts exactly the same, 2029, unless OUC exercises that option. So the term doesn't change. It's that, and the gas asset would go away. But again, you don't have that gas asset until 2029 anyway. And unless you were going to sell it again back to OUC. I presume OUC would not give up the gas. Well, they'd probably take a payment of some type. But they, in reality, own that until 2029. So those are the assets that you would be giving up. And you would, if you gave them up in 2015, and let's say right at the end of 2015, we find a Winter Park in the world who wants to be a city and establish an electric utility, and they'll say, oh, we like everything you have on your load, and we would like to have that St. Lucie part of your power contract. We would have to go back to OUC and say, listen, in order to make our deal made with this city over here, we need you to exit your option to purchase St. Lucie. Knowing Jan Asbrew as well as I do over the last few years, he would say, oh, Jim, that's not a problem. This is how much it's going to cost you. And so it's one of those items that has, again, following the dollars as to what you would do. So it is selling an asset early before the termination of that contract. And does it make us less attractive in a potential sale if you're losing an asset? Because nuclear seems to be.
Saying that the savings we have from OUC are guaranteed for 5 years, and after that we can be right back where we were, but we would be minus St. Lucie.
No, our savings actually goes till 2029 based on the charges. The 3 years is what we can really say this is what our actual savings will be based on our present rate and rate structures. Anything beyond that we still see as a savings because the price for capacity is below that which is in our present contract.
What was it that
I think-
happens in 5 years?
But-
You mentioned something that an occurrence in 5 years with.
I think, if I can try this, this OUC contract, the revised contract, will always be cheaper than the one we have right now would have been. But it's not the only cost component. So to say that doing this will make our rates go down,
Can't control it.
there's all kinds of other things we can't control, including our own costs and personnel costs and health insurance. So I think what you're saying is OUC to OUC, this revised deal will be cheaper than the one we have now, but that doesn't mean that some other element of cost might not make it so that our total rate isn't necessarily going to be cheaper. Is that?
Catherine, the 5-year element, that's with OUC has the option to discontinue the contract. So in 2020, they could, or 2021 actually, they could come along and they have to give us a 2-year notice and say, we no longer want to serve you under this contract. And then we have to.
The original contract minus.
No, then we go to market. Then we put out an RFP for power supply, similar to what Lake Worth
Then we're
did.
done with it.
That is correct. It all terminates, except they still retain the option to purchase St. Lucie after that 5-year. Now,
Until 2029.
yes. But let's say that they take and exercise the option to purchase St. Lucie, and then all of a sudden the crack comes in St. Lucie, then they have part of the exposure that we would add 100% of the exposure.
And if they exercise the option to let us go and we have to go out to market, it's going to depend on the conditions at that time, whether when we go to market we get something that's cheaper than what we have.
If it's like it is today and there's plenty of supply and low demand, then you're fine.
Be a good thing. But then again, if something else happens in 5 years, it might not be a good thing.
Yeah.
There's no way to say.
But if that was the case, OUC would probably still want to service. That would imply they have plenty of capacity as well.
Well, I'd make a point as a caveat that people don't listen to, that this, whatever the number is, a reduction of $10,
Yes.
that is not going to happen instantaneously. So that
correct.
people assuming that it's going to occur on March 1st, I think being misled or making an assumption it's going, with the transmission having to be put in, with all of the other piece parts meshing, the puzzle put together, it's going to take some time. So yes, it still will be 3 years at $7 million, but from the date of closure of all of these, presuming the OUC. And the only other point is that this deal with FPL was evaluated at $180 million. 60% of that is $108 million. There's not going to be, at least in my experience, that you can go in and wrest away customers and contracts and not compensate for what you're doing, including stranded costs. To assume that that's just going to go away and be transferred over. So, I mean, but I don't think we're there. Just for the reasons of this discussion, it's just apparent that we have to work something out as opposed mutually. So that rather than keep butting heads and have carnage all over the place.
But part of the issue, the city is negotiating and trying to work a program that maybe works for somebody else, and then maybe somebody else has not even agreed that they'll go along with anything we do in the first darn place. So you're negotiating in a really fuzzy area, and maybe making decisions that, if they were part of the deal, the county and or the city, they might not make those same decisions. Just like you're saying, is it worth the $21 million for trade? If they were part and parcel as partners or participants, they might say, Jim, we don't think that's a good deal. Let's not do it. But we're in a situation, we're sort of negotiating all of this with a lack of understanding that anybody will agree to anything that we bring to them. Isn't that right, Jim?
That is very true. But Glenn, let me say, if I was in Indian River Shores' position, and the city of Vero Beach comes to me and says, let's form this committee and we'll study this.
I know.
Then I would say, wait a minute, we're not ready to concede yet. We think we still have a good case. And based on what Bruce May says, he thinks he has a good case. You talk to Chef Wright, he thinks he has a good case. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of those, and some of the elements are going to be unprecedented. For example, having a utility totally pull wires out and somebody else put wires in is in violation of other state laws, i.e. duplication of public utilities. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a law that's very, very clear on that you don't do that. So then you come back and it says, okay, then you have to sell. Well, public property cannot be condemned. Public property cannot be forced into sale. And so you have the other debate, given that our assets, for example, we have a substation sitting on city property that happens to be in Indian River Shores. And so those are the type of complications of trying to get through the process. But again, going back, if I was Indian River Shores, unless I'm ready to say that, yes, there is a negotiable area here that we can sit down and negotiate, but there's been no indication. And I understand their strategy. I mean, if you're in litigation, you keep on going until one side gives or the other. And in our particular case, what we're trying to do is take each one of those elements and sort of address it. And we think we can address most of the elements. The only one that we can't, and we've made it very clear, is we don't have FP&L rates. I mean, it's just the way it is. And Dan, coming back on the damages, we obviously don't agree with that position either, but we haven't even addressed that. We're not studying that part of it.
Right. It's a waste of time.
It seems like in lawsuits of this magnitude, when you got government entities suing one another and potential third parties out there, it's very difficult to come to a settlement unless both parties really pursue litigation strongly, because they both are confident in their initial position. And that's why you don't want to see this go on and all this time wasted, but you really have no alternative when we are the ones being sued. We have to pursue litigation defense, just like they're pursuing litigation plaintiff.
And I agree with that.
There comes to a time when there will be a settlement.
And unfortunately, Dan, I agree with you. I think for as long as this debate has gone on in the city of Vero Beach, Indian River Shores, and Indian River County, I mean, it far predates me. And I mean, it's just been one of those issues. Somewhere along the line, a third party is going to have to come in and resolve the concerns. And that's probably the way that Indian River Shores looks at it as well. And you know, I'm guessing what their conclusion would be. But all that being said, the third party, it is going to take, Glenn, if we could finish it in 2 years,
Yeah.
that would be
for
great.
years.
I mean, I just,
We're going to be here a long time.
I think we'll still be taking depositions in 2 years.
I think we'll be lucky. I agree with you.
Well,
Thank you. Absolutely
time
right.
goes by fast when you're having fun. You know?
Well, and I'll tell you, it's been a time of my life for the last 3.
Which is so hard to get over to the public when we keep saying it's complex and involved. And then you have the siege mentality. At least we're making an attempt here for whomever is watching or listening, that to try to lay it out as realistically as the commission can, to say, this is what we're up against, and bringing up points that, on both sides, to say, we understand we're at a stalemate. But we have to break that Gordian knot somehow. On a mutual basis, otherwise it'll go into the next millennium.
Well, again, I've been on a lot of lawsuits in my lifetime too, and when you're dealing with this much money, the reality is we never really settle in court. We do compromise about 100 days out of court, or maybe 10 or 1,
Right.
but we do settle usually before we go to court because there's too damn much risk. Excuse my language.
Well,
and going to court, Dan.
Well, you have no choice. You got to defend yourself.
That maybe takes a lot of exploratory work, but
Peter, coming back, something that I want to emphasize what you said. This OUC, if we exercise that contract tomorrow, the next day, $10 off your bills per thousand is not going to happen.
Yeah.
What it is going to take is that we have to do the transmission study, then we have to find out what improvements have to be made, and if we are into the first quarter of next year, if everything fell into place, then we might be able to start downsizing and start heading into that $10 per thousand reduction. And it would probably take us 8 or 9 months, because you're talking about the decommissioning of the power plant. You're talking about changing that whole process of doing that. You're talking about paying off some, or possibly incurring some more debt in order to do those upgrades. And those numbers have not really been factored in that we would have to put as part of our elements. And we think we're very, very conservative on the wash between the power plant and the new power supply through the demand charge. We think we are conservative there. There might be a little room, but that won't come for the first couple of years, because we still have to, take that plant offline, do the decommission, do all the work that has to be done in order to put it into an idle stage, in which we still have to provide some security walking around it. And we have budgeted money for that element of it. So we just think, and we, again, do not want to mislead anybody in this exercise. Our goal is to try to bring our rates down over time, and that's what we're trying to do.
yeah. The only thing I can say positive about this whole mess, Jim, is you're not going to get any gray over the next 2 years.
I just hope to hang on to what I've got, Glenn.
You've done pretty well.
Any other comments, or should we move on to the next item of the agenda? Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you, Commissioner.
I have to excuse myself. Is that all right? Have you got a quorum? Yeah.
We do.
I have to excuse myself. I'm sorry. Is that all right?
Of course.
We want to take a few-minute break and then see if we can wrap it up on the last piece of it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, about 5 minutes or so. And, be back before 4 and see if we can wrap this up.